The forest breathed with such abundance that morning, it seemed impossible anything could ever end. Birds called from every branch, their songs layering into a symphony of plenty that had lasted so long the people had begun to forget what silence sounded like. Fish jumped in the wide river that curved past their summer camp, their silver backs catching early light as if the water itself was celebrating. Berry bushes hung heavy with fruit so ripe it stained fingers purple before they could even pick it. The very air hummed with insects drunk on nectar, and children's laughter echoed off the water like music that would never fade. But abundance, the elders knew, could be the most dangerous trap of all. Ayanna stepped from her lodge as the first pale light touched the tops of the white pines. The morning mist rose from the river in lazy spirals, and already she could hear the soft splash of someone checking fish weirs upstream. She stretched, feeling the warm air on her skin even before the sun had fully risen. This was the fourth moon of plenty, and every day had brought more gifts than the day before. Her daughter Nayeli appeared with baskets woven from sweet grass and birch bark, eyes sparkling with confidence that comes from never knowing want. At 16 summers, Nayeli had lived through only mild winters, never seeing the hollow-eyed hunger that could come when the forest closed its generous hand. "The strawberry patch by the old beaver dam," Nayeli said, knowing the berries would be thick as pebbles on a beach. "Kimi says her basket was full before dawn yesterday." Ayanna nodded, but something in the morning light made her pause. Too golden, too perfect. The kind of light that came before storms. This abundance felt different from other good seasons, desperate, as if the earth was giving everything at once. They walked toward berry patches on worn paths, joining other women moving through morning with easy voices. Baskets bumped against hips. Children darted like minnows through reeds. Everyone moved with the loose gait of people who knew there would be enough. More than enough. The strawberry plants sprawled where an old beaver pond had been. Berries hung so thick they weighed down plants, some dropping before they could be picked. Red stained the earth like spilled paint. Nayeli dropped to her knees, filling her basket with quick movements, popping every third berry into her mouth. Around them, other women worked with easy rhythm. Kimi called out jokes that made everyone giggle. Sunka's twin daughters competed to see who could fill baskets faster. Old Winona sat in willow shade, sorting berries and telling stories about summers when work was harder and rewards smaller. But even as Ayanna's hands moved automatically through the picking, her eyes kept drifting to the horizon. The morning sky was too clear, too blue. Not a single cloud marked its perfect dome, and the wind that usually came off the water at dawn was eerily still. It reminded her of something her grandmother had said long ago about seasons when the earth gave too much too easily. "When the forest shows all its treasures at once," the old woman had warned, "it is not generosity, it is a test." By sunrise, berry picking was done and men returned from the river with news that made everyone smile. Fish were running thick as clouds of silver, more than they had ever seen. Dakota stood waist-deep in current, fishing spear balanced with patience earned through years of practice. But today, he hardly needed patience. Fish swam past in endless schools, so predictable he could catch them with bare hands. He thrust his spear down and came up with a fat salmon that thrashed silver against morning light. On the bank, his son, Chaitan, whooped with delight. At 12 summers, the boy was still learning to read water and fish behavior. But today, even Chaitan caught more fish than his family could eat in a week. His spear found targets again and again, each success filling him with dangerous confidence. "Watch me, father," Chaitan called, driving his spear down with more enthusiasm than skill. He missed completely, sending ripples that should have scattered fish for hours. Instead, salmon simply circled back, eager to be caught. Dakota frowned. In all his years fishing this stretch, he had never seen salmon behave this way. They were supposed to be cautious, quick to flee from spear shadows or footsteps. Their survival depended on wariness, but these fish moved as if they had forgotten how to be afraid. Other men worked the river upstream and downstream, their voices carrying across the water in easy conversation. Spears flashed in the sunlight, and the wooden platform where they cleaned their catch was already piling high with silver bodies. Enough fish for many days of drying, enough to trade with other bands, enough to make the elders nod with satisfaction and declare this a summer that would be remembered for generations. But as Dakota watched his son's easy success, he felt the same unease that had been growing in his chest since the moon began to wane. There was something wrong with abundance that came without effort. It made people soft, careless. It made them forget that winter always came, no matter how generous the summer had been. Back at camp, the work of processing the fish should have taken hours. Normally, the women would have spent the entire morning scaling and cutting, hanging strips of meat on wooden racks to dry in the smoke of carefully tended fires. But today, there were so many fish that hands moved quickly, almost frantically trying to keep up with the river's gift. Nayeli sat cross-legged on a woven mat, her knife moving in quick, precise cuts as she filleted salmon after salmon. Her mother had taught her this skill when she was barely tall enough to hold a knife safely, but she had never worked with such abundance. Fish covered every available surface, and still the men brought more. "We should save some for tomorrow's work," Ayanna suggested, but even as she spoke, she knew how the suggestion sounded. Why save fish when the river was clearly full of them? Why preserve today what could be caught fresh tomorrow? Nayeli looked up, her hands stained with scales and her knife still moving. "The river gives us more every day," she said with the certainty of youth. "Chayton says the salmon are so thick he could walk across the water on their backs." The image made Ayanna smile despite her growing worry. The boy did have a gift for exaggeration, but she had seen the morning's catch herself, had watched the men return again and again with full spears and full baskets. It was as if the river had decided to empty itself at their feet. Around them, other families worked with the same quick efficiency. Knives flashed and fish fell apart under experienced hands. Children who were old enough to help carried bundles of sticks to feed the smoking fires, while those too young darted between the adults, their faces bright with excitement. The air filled with the scent of wood smoke and fish, the sounds of easy work and easier laughter. But even as the community worked together with the smooth coordination that came from generations of practice, Ayanna noticed small things that troubled her. Tools left unattended while their owners paused to joke with friends. Smoking fires that burned too hot because no one was watching them closely. Valuable salt scattered carelessly in the grass because there seemed to be plenty more. These were the kinds of mistakes that came from having too much too easily. When every day brought more fish than they could process, when every basket filled almost by itself, when every task succeeded without real effort, people stopped paying attention to the details that kept them alive. As sun climbed toward its peak, air grew thick and still. Morning's easy breeze off the river died completely, leaving camp wrapped in humidity that made simple tasks feel like work. Sweat beaded on foreheads, and usual midday energy began to flag. Chayton was first to abandon his assigned tasks. He had been helping repair fishing nets, work requiring patience and attention. But morning's easy success filled him with restless energy that couldn't be contained by sitting still. When children ran past toward the swimming spot, he dropped his work and followed. "The nets can wait," he called. "Fish are so thick they'll swim into broken nets anyway." Dakota watched his son splash into water with other children, their laughter echoing off trees. Part of him wanted to call the boy back, but rational thought asked what was the point. They had enough fish drying to last into cold moons. There would be time for repairs when air was cooler. Instead, Dakota walked toward shade where several men had gathered. They sat in a loose circle, passing a pipe filled with kinnikinnick, talking in the easy way of people with nowhere urgent to be. Conversation drifted from hunting stories to jokes about wives and children. In another part of camp, women had also begun to slow their work. Baskets of berries sat in whatever shade they could find, and smoking fires burned lower as tenders stepped away for water or conversation. Nayeli found herself with friends her own age, hands still busy but attention focused on gossip. Work that should have occupied full attention became background activity, something hands could do while minds wandered to more interesting topics. It was Winona who noticed it first. The old woman had lived through more summers than anyone else in the band, and her senses had been sharpened by decades of reading the subtle moods of forest and sky. She was sitting in the shade of her favorite willow, sorting berries into different baskets according to size and ripeness, when she felt the change. The air had gone completely still. Not the comfortable stillness of a lazy afternoon, but the tense quiet that comes before storms. The insects that had been humming steadily all morning had fallen silent. Even the river seemed muted, its constant murmur reduced to a whisper. Winona lifted her head and studied the western horizon with eyes that had learned to see what others missed. The sky was still blue, but there was a quality to the light that made her old bones ache with memory. She had seen this before, this sudden shift from abundance to warning, this moment when the earth held its breath before revealing its true intentions. She set down her basket and walked slowly toward the center of camp, her movements deliberate and measured. Her back was bent with age, but her mind was sharp as any obsidian blade. People noticed her approach and turned to listen, because Winona's words carried the weight of accumulated wisdom. "Gather the children," she said quietly to Ayana, who was nearest. "Call them back from the water." Ayana felt her stomach tighten. "What is it, grandmother?" "Storm coming," Winona replied, though her eyes remained fixed on the western sky. "Big one, the kind that changes everything." As if summoned by her words, a dark line appeared on the horizon. At first it looked like a smudge of smoke, but it grew quickly, spreading across the sky like spilled ink. The wind that had been absent all day suddenly returned, gusting from the west and carrying scents of rain and distant lightning. Chayton was still in the water when the first gust hit. He had been floating on his back, eyes closed, letting the current carry him gently downstream while he daydreamed about the easy fish and the endless berries and the way this summer seemed like it would last forever. The sudden wind made him open his eyes, and what he saw on the horizon made him forget how to swim for a moment. The storm was massive, a wall of dark clouds that stretched from north to south as far as he could see. Lightning flickered in its depths like trapped fireflies, and even as he watched, the wind began to whip the river into small whitecaps. This was not the gentle summer shower that cooled hot afternoons and made the berries grow sweeter. This was the kind of storm that could flatten camps and strip trees bare, the kind that reminded people how small they were in the face of the earth's true power. He swam quickly to shore, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. Other children were already scrambling out of the water, their games forgotten as they looked toward the approaching darkness. Parents called to them with voices that carried new urgency, and suddenly the lazy afternoon transformed into something else entirely. Back at camp, people moved with the swift efficiency that came from understanding danger. Baskets were gathered and carried toward the lodges. Smoking fires were banked or extinguished, their precious loads of drying fish wrapped in hides and moved to shelter. Tools that had been left scattered in the grass were collected and secured. But even as hands moved quickly, Ayana could see the uncertainty in people's faces. They had grown soft during these moons of abundance. Tasks that should have been automatic required conscious thought. Safety measures that should have been second nature had to be remembered and implemented. She watched Nayeli struggle to secure a bundle of fishing spears that had been left leaning against a tree. In past summers, those spears would never have been left unattended. They would have been properly stored after use, wrapped and tied and put away in their designated places. But abundance had made the band careless, and now the approaching storm threatened to scatter their tools like leaves in the wind. As the storm clouds built higher and the wind grew stronger, the elders gathered around the council fire. It had been lit hastily in the center of camp, more for ceremony than warmth, and its flames danced wildly in the gusting air. Sparks flew upward and were caught by the wind, disappearing into the darkening sky like brief orange stars. Dakota sat with the other experienced hunters and fishermen, his face grave as he considered what the storm might mean. They had all seen the abundance of the past moons, had all felt the uneasy sense that it was too much, too easy. Now the earth was showing them the other side of its nature, the side that demanded respect and preparation and careful attention to details. "The fish weirs won't hold in high water," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the wind. "If the river rises, we'll lose everything we haven't already secured." Maka nodded grimly. "And there's too much fish drying to move it all before the rain comes. We'll have to choose what to save." The words hung in the air like the smell of approaching rain. Choice. After moons of having everything, of never having to decide between competing needs, they were suddenly faced with the kind of decisions their grandparents had made routinely. Save the fish or save the tools. Protect the lodges or protect the food stores. Prepare for the immediate danger or plan for the longer consequences. Winona's voice cut through the discussion like an obsidian knife. "The forest gave us abundance to test us," she said, her ancient eyes reflecting the firelight. "It wanted to see if we would remember who we are when everything came easily. It wanted to see if we would stay strong when strength was not required." The elders fell silent, understanding the deeper truth in her words. This season of plenty had not been a gift. It had been a lesson about the dangers of forgetting that survival required constant vigilance, constant respect for forces beyond their control. "What do we choose?" asked Tokala, his question directed toward the whole council but his eyes fixed on Winona. The old woman was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving from face to face around the circle. These were good people, experienced people, but they had let the easy abundance make them soft. Now they had to remember skills they had not needed to use for many moons. "We choose wisdom," she said finally. "We save what we can save. We protect what we must protect. And we remember that the earth gives us only what we can handle, if we handle it properly." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. The council fire hissed as water hit the flames, sending up small puffs of steam that smelled of cedar smoke and coming storm. The camp transformed as people moved with newfound urgency. Children who had been playing in the water all morning now helped their parents secure loose items and move valuable stores to higher ground. Hands that had been moving slowly in the heat now worked with the quick efficiency of people who understood that time was running short. Ayana and Nayeli worked together to wrap bundles of drying fish in waterproof hides. The meat was only half smoked, still soft and vulnerable to moisture, but it represented days of work and many meals for their family. They rolled the strips carefully in processed deer skins, then tied the bundles with cordage made from twisted plant fibers. "Will we lose it all?" Nayeli asked as rain began to fall more steadily. Her voice carried the uncertainty of someone who had never faced a choice between preserving food and accepting loss. "We'll save what we can," Ayana replied, though she felt her own worry sharp in her chest. In years past, they would never have had this much fish drying at once. They would have processed smaller amounts more carefully, ensuring that each batch was fully prepared before starting the next. But the easy abundance had made them greedy, and now they paid the price. Around them, other families made similar desperate calculations. Dakota and Chayton worked to move canoes away from the river before the water could rise high enough to sweep them away. The boy moved with a seriousness his father had not seen all summer, his earlier confidence replaced by understanding of real consequences. "Why didn't we pull them up yesterday?" Chayton asked as they dragged a heavy canoe through the grass. "Why did we leave them so close to the water?" Dakota paused in his work, rain beginning to soak through his shirt. Because yesterday we thought the river was our friend, he said. We forgot that friends can also be dangerous when we're not paying attention. The lesson was one that Chaitan would remember for the rest of his life. Easy success had made him careless, had made them all careless. The river that had given them fish so easily could just as easily take away everything they had worked to preserve. Other men worked to secure the larger structures that couldn't be moved. Lodges were reinforced with extra stakes driven deep into the earth. Smoking racks were dismantled or weighted down with stones. Tools and weapons were gathered and stored in the most protected places they could find. But even as they worked, everyone could see that they would not save everything. There was simply too much scattered abundance, too many things that had been left unsecured during the easy days. Baskets of berries would be lost to the wind and rain. Fish not yet fully dried would spoil in the moisture. Months of easy gathering would be reduced to whatever they could protect in the few hours before the storm's full fury arrived. The rain came in sheets, driven by wind that howled through the trees and turned leaves into stinging projectiles. Lightning split the sky with brightness that left purple afterimages dancing behind closed eyes, and thunder followed with sounds like the earth cracking open. Inside their lodge, Ayana's family huddled together and listened to the storm test every rope and stake that held their shelter upright. The sound of the rain on the bark covering was like hundreds of fingers drumming, and the wind made the whole structure sway and creak. But they were safe and warm, and they had managed to save more than they had feared. The bundles of fish wrapped in waterproof hides remained dry. The baskets of berries that they had prioritized over others sat secure in the center of the lodge. Their tools and weapons were protected, and their family was together. "Listen," Winona said during a brief lull in the storm's fury. Her voice was calm, almost contemplative. "Do you hear what the thunder is saying?" Chaitan strained his ears, hearing only the chaotic noise of wind and rain and creaking wood. But gradually he began to understand that his great-grandmother was not asking him to hear words in the thunder. She was asking him to hear the truth that the storm carried. "It's saying that abundance comes with responsibility," he said slowly, working out the meaning as he spoke. "That plenty is not the same as safety." The old woman smiled and nodded. "The forest gave us everything we needed to survive this storm," she said. "But it also tested whether we would remember how to be worthy of its gifts." Outside, the wind reached its peak, and they felt their lodge strain against forces that could have easily destroyed it if the stakes had not been driven deep enough, if the ropes had not been tied properly, if the covering had not been secured with the kind of attention to detail that survival demanded. But they had remembered just in time. The abundance had made them soft, but it had not made them helpless. When the testing came, they had found the strength and wisdom to respond. After the storm finally spent itself, when the storm had passed and left the air clean and cool, the community gathered again around the council fire. It had to be relit with dry wood that had been carefully stored, and its flames seemed somehow different from the careless fires of the morning. This fire was built with attention, maintained with respect, treated as the precious resource it had always been. People sat closer together than they had in many weeks. The easy abundance that had made them spread out and work alone had been replaced by an understanding that survival was a community effort. Stories were shared about what had been saved and what had been lost, but the mood was not one of mourning. Instead, there was a sense of lessons learned and wisdom regained. "My grandfather used to say," Maka told the circle, "that the earth gives us abundance to teach us gratitude, but it gives us hardship to teach us strength." Tonight, I think we learned both lessons at once. Children who had been careless that morning now sat close to their parents, understanding in a new way how quickly security could be threatened. Chaitan found himself looking at his fishing spears with different eyes, seeing them not as toys for easy games, but as tools that required respect and proper care. Nayeli held a basket of berries that represented a careful choice made under pressure. When the storm came and baskets had to be abandoned, she had learned to distinguish between what was truly necessary and what was merely convenient. The lesson would serve her well in winters to come. The abundance was real, Ayana said, her voice carrying across the circle. The fish were truly thick in the river. The berries were truly sweet on the bushes. The earth was truly generous. But generosity without wisdom is dangerous for the receiver. Heads nodded around the fire, understanding the truth she spoke. The forest had not been cruel in sending the storm. It had been teaching them the most important lesson of all, that receiving gifts requires the wisdom to use them well. As the night deepened and the fire burned lower, the community made plans for the days ahead. There was still abundance in the forest, but now they would approach it differently. They would take what they needed with gratitude, but they would also remember that every gift came with the responsibility to be worthy of it. The summer's lesson would be remembered when winter came. When careful, preparation meant the difference between survival and suffering. It would be passed down to children not yet born, told around future fires as a story about the season when the forest gave too much, and the people learned to receive its gifts with proper respect. And in the years that followed, when other seasons of abundance came, they would remember this night. They would remember that plenty without vigilance was a trap, that ease without effort was a test, and that the earth's greatest gifts always came with the expectation that those who received them would prove themselves worthy through wisdom, preparation, and respect for forces beyond their control. The fire crackled lower, sending sparks up toward stars that were finally visible again through breaks in the clouds. Tomorrow would bring new work, careful work, done with attention to detail and respect for consequences. The abundance would still be there, but they would approach it as people who understood the true nature of the earth's generosity. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was exactly what they needed to survive and thrive in a world where abundance and hardship walked hand in hand, where wisdom meant understanding the relationship between the two, and where respect for the earth's power was the foundation of all security.